What's up guys and welcome back to On the Brick with a review of the biggest custom set I have shown off so far. This is the Eclipse class Dreadnaught from Jorstad Designs. There are three things to get out of the way before we actually get into the review. First, there will be a link to the instructions in the description down below. However, later on in this video, I'm going to tell you why I wouldn't actually recommend that. And that's probably the only time I will ever say such. Second, because of the size and nature of this set, it is going to be a little different, and I'm just going to go through the different parts as you build this and put it together. And third, this is of course the Mould King non-LEGO version of the set, which as far as I'm aware is pretty identical with some minor differences to the original design. It took me about 2 weeks to put this set together, and that was before I had this new job, so it was a lot of work every single day. If you're in school or work, this is gonna take a while. The real version contains 10,101 pieces, however the Mould King version is said to contain 10,368. Some of that are these weird additional supports that aren't really needed, and some of that is just how non-LEGO does things, where hinges are counted as 2 pieces where LEGO counts them as 1. And if you want to build this, it's going to take up quite a lot of room, as you can see here. It's 45 inches in length, 29 inches in width, and 20 inches in height, and that's 45 by 73 by 50 centimeters. This thing is absolutely huge. So when you're building this, you actually start with this frame that you see in the middle here, with all those dark tan and dark bluish gray tiles and pieces, and then of course like the Technic beams as well. And while it does hold together for the most part, this section here, which you actually build the front and back of this separately, this is where it connects, and it just does not do a good job at doing that. If you try to lift this, these will separate. And considering this section is the core of the build, I feel like it should have been done better. However, once you're done with that section, you go on to build the big front drooping area along with the stands. One huge difference between the LEGO and non-LEGO version is that in non-LEGO, it's entirely clear. Even the Technic pins are clear. And while it definitely looks like a lot on the camera here, I can promise you in person, it's not actually that bad, and I like it a lot more. You do start this by building the bottom 2 panels first, and that does include these bottom layers as well, because yeah, as you've been seeing this entire time, there is actually a full interior to this. Just a heads up, you are going to see minifigures. They are my personal minifigures and are absolutely not included. All these sections you see here are these giant builds that actually hold together using a ton of Technic pieces and plates and everything, and it actually works very, very well. This is seriously one of the few times where I almost had no problems connecting anything or having anything fit because it all just worked well. In many aspects, this was designed pretty decently. Now, if you've ever built this, you know that there is one huge exception to that, and we're going to talk about it in just a second. But for now, on the first floor here, assuming you're looking at this from the front of the Eclipse, this is the left side, and the first thing you see are all these gun racks. These guns are actually included in the kit, and then behind them is the crew quarter with 2 bunk beds or 4 beds total. You also have like a computer station there. Now, that is something to point out as well. Being a non-LEGO set, there were no printed tiles. So if you ever see something that you think, okay, that should probably be printed, you're most likely correct. Like this computer or all computers in this set. The biggest example of non-printed pieces is actually on the right side of this floor with this entire console here where nothing is printed. This is actually the jail area, and this is one of the few areas I had any sort of trouble with because that center console just did not want to stick in. I ended up making it work by putting that in first and then the side 2. You then have 2 jail cells here, each contain a bed and are blocked by these lightsaber blades, these light blue lightsaber blades, and here you can see one of the prisoners I have. Building that section with the lightsaber blades is a little tricky just because it's not the strongest build. However, once you get it in there, it'll be totally and perfectly fine. Now, remember how I said there was one huge exception to this being an easy build? Well, that is putting on the bottom panels. This is just ridiculous. What you're seeing on screen now, and what you'll continue seeing on screen, is every single connection point on just one side of the bottom panels. It is absolutely almost impossible for a single person to put this on themselves. There are just too many connection points. I say almost because I managed to do it, but that was with 2 full days of struggling with it. I literally had to build supports underneath the panel so I could lift them up to the correct height and then just go one by one as much as I could to make it work. And it sometimes didn't. Like I said, it took 2 days to do it. Now, while it does hold the panels in perfectly fine, and I was able to even transport this thing without it falling, that is, to me personally, a huge flaw with this set. No set should require more than one person to be able to actually put it together. Yes, like I said, it does work. However, if you live alone or you have friends or family that don't want to help you with this, you're gonna end up struggling so much more than you ever reasonably should. It's ridiculous. I actually had to modify some of the connections because I couldn't get them to stick or stay, and that's probably because I was doing this alone. But once you get them on and you get them on properly, they will stay. I personally kept my supports underneath them for the rest of this build though. However, moving on, you build this conference room next, which is nice. It's kind of like the one in the Death Star, and I could have put a bunch of Imperial officers in here, but I personally decided not to just so you can show it. There's also this entrance here, and there's also a window in the back there, which is a little weird because what's back there is the throne room. I personally love this room. I think the build looks absolutely amazing. The chair doesn't turn or swerve or anything like that. It's pretty static, but still, I think this looks really awesome. And of course, I decided to throw Thrawn in there because why not? Now, you do actually have a build on the outside of this where you have these tube things, another gun rack, and then the shower as well. And that's because this will actually end up right next to the barracks that we saw earlier. Now, if you remember way back at the beginning, there was this section on the right here that had these 6 chairs. Well, this is what it looks like once you actually finish that section. It's just a normal Star Destroyer bridge. This section actually just slides right on in and connects in there. If you wanted to take it out, you could pretty easily do it, even though I chose not to, just for the sake of ease. There are obviously stairs here going both down to the barracks and the prison, and then up to the next section, along with a few more consoles as well. Really, if you did get the Mould King version, maybe consider switching out some of these for consoles or printed pieces that you have. To me, this is actually my favorite section here. I love how smooth this looks, how awesome it all fits together, and I really love how smoothly it connects to the barracks here and everything. Like I said, this shower is a completely different build that you put on top of it, and it just slides right on in there, and it just fits perfectly. So that extra pair of gun racks that you saw is also just across from the first pair we saw a few minutes ago. And I just really loved this view looking down this area into the barracks. And then on this side, we have the view from the other area leading down to the prison center again. No gun racks or anything on this side, but still, I think it looks really cool. The next area you build is the command center, and this is definitely hit the absolute hardest by the lack of printed tiles, as pretty much every single piece you see should be a printed tile. There are a ton of consoles, maps, and everything going on here, and of course, if you have ever seen the original, then you know the one big change in this section. The orange cone in the middle should be an orange orb. However, that piece is actually pretty rare, so I'm not surprised it wasn't copied. And when I say rare, I mean the original is actually a bionicle orb, so it's a little old. Still, I think this section does look awesome, and it really does actually help pull all this together. Now, the downside to this is that it does cover up both the conference room and the throne room down below. You can easily take this out, but here's the thing about an interior with a set this big. Who's ever going to use that? I personally love that there's an interior here, but it's always going to be on display with the top panels installed. I'm never gonna open this up to take out any of this or play with any of this. And the demographic of people who would probably aren't buying sets like this. This was not cheap by any means, and I had to save up for a while for it. And if you bought the real LEGO version, it's gonna cost way more. and probably be even less likely to be played with. So I'm actually really interested to know what people think about that, because it is an interesting discussion. Is there actually a point to having interiors on these giant custom sets? Let me know your thoughts down below. I would be very interested to hear what you have to say. But with that said, this really is a beautiful build, and I do love how the inside of this was utilized. Obviously, without an interior, this would be significantly less pieces, but I enjoy the fact that there was the effort included. Now, once you get the full interior done, you actually put the first part to the top panels on, as this is actually done in different sections. These are significantly easier than the bottom ones, as they just slide on in. It's really that simple, actually. However, I did have to fudge it with mine just a little bit. Fudge it isn't a word. Fidget or fudge? I mixed the two together. You can see that there is this giant gap in the top, and yes, that is one of the Kyoshi novels helping hold up the bottom of this. And for some reason, the left panel was looking like this the whole time. I tried messing with this so much to see what it was that was causing this, and eventually it kind of just clicked. So I have no idea. Literally, I just kept moving things around until it worked. Then after that, you build part 2 of the upper panels, and this is done a little cleverly. Both sides are mirrored, and they're actually just connected by hinges in the middle, so it can just sit right on top. Most of this is connected just by gravity at this point, and it works extremely well. And then you finally put on the bridge, and I also realized at this point that obviously you do the engines at some point. It's actually done way before this in various different steps, but most of the engines themselves are done right before you put on the top panels. Putting the bridge on itself was actually a little difficult as well, as it does have to slide on in there, and for some reason it just didn't want to do it, but I was able to, so just be a little patient and don't push too hard. Oh, and then the last thing you build is the stand with the 2-scale Star Destroyer. This Star Destroyer is actually bigger than the one you get with the Super Star Destroyer UCS set, so I can't really compare the two, unfortunately. But that is the size of a Star Destroyer like you see in the background compared to the Eclipse. This thing is huge. Oh, and then if you wanted to see them, here are the engines. It's a pretty easy build, nothing too special back here, but they look good. So the build itself was actually pretty good. This is the one time that I have ever built a Star Destroyer or Star Destroyer-like set that had these giant panels, and they weren't frustrating. They held together extremely well, and they never fell apart. Even when the bottom panels actually fell on me at one point, they still held together relatively well. Being Lego, they did shatter just a little bit, but it wasn't anything that took more than a minute to put back together. And that is just so nice. I cannot explain properly just how nice it is to be able to build these panels and not have it be a problem. In the background, you can see both the original UCS Star Destroyer and a custom Venator, and the panels for both of those were such a hassle that it was really frustrating. So it's nice to not have that here. And really, with the exception of the stupid way of putting on the bottom panels, this build was really good all around. There were some very minor complaints, but nothing that ever made me be like, oh, why am I doing this, or want to stop. I was constantly sending progress pics to my friends and even my girlfriend because of how exciting this thing was. It's so nice to have. So with all the praise I have for this, why am I saying that you shouldn't really buy the instructions? Okay, hold on. Don't get me wrong. You should absolutely always support the designers, even Jorstad in this case. I personally don't like the guy even remotely. However, you should definitely make your own decision and should always support designers. The reason that I'm saying not to buy these instructions is because of this line included in them, where he clearly states that this manual is not perfect and includes various errors, and they are not actively supporting updates for this model. Okay, sure, this thing came out a few years ago and it's not all too bad, but then lower the price. A $35 asking price for something that you are actively not working on or going to support anymore really isn't okay. But you literally say that this is not perfect and includes various efforts, and I am not going to send my viewers to buy an imperfect and flawed product. Especially when I know the only reason you're doing that is because this Mould King version exists. That's twice now that I have bought instructions that have been imperfect and received zero support from them, and have really just been screwed by Jorstad. So if you want to support him, maybe buy something else that Mould King doesn't have, maybe his Venator or any of his Rebellion ships. It's genuinely surprising to me how good this build is, considering the other two builds of his that I've done were pretty lackluster. The Lucre Hulk is genuinely one of the worst custom sets I've ever built, as it just kept falling apart on me to the point that I just gave up, and the Hammerhead isn't really UCS or, well, worth it. So what about the ratings? Well, the build is going to get a 7 out of 10 because of the more difficult parts, mainly the bottom panels, which really are too frustrating. And for a similar reason, the design is actually going to get an 8 out of 10. I really do like how the bottom panels were done without using magnets, but again, I personally believe builds should be doable by a single person. If you're in the US, the Mould King version of this set will cost you over $400, which I think is pretty reasonable for 10,000 pieces, so I'm going to go ahead and give that a 9 out of 10. However, the instructions are going to get a 4 out of 10. I wanted to make them higher, however, admitting that it's flawed and not being willing to support it, plus still charging $35 is just a little too ridiculous for me. Oh, and I almost forgot, but the instructions themselves will get a 7 out of 10 as well. So if I did my math right, that is a solid 7 out of 10 for this set, which is pretty appropriate. This was such a joy to put together, and a lot of fun just to have on display. I know it's been a little hard to show off the entire set here, and that's just because I don't have great lighting in my apartment just to film like this, so thank you for putting up with that and making it this far into the video. And if you have, you might as well hit that like button and maybe consider subscribing, which would really help me out. Also, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and while you're down there, head to the description where you can check me out on Instagram, Discord, and of course on Patreon, where you can join all of these wonderful people, get shoutouts like Jonathan and Project Elements, and help me get future sets just like this one. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you next time.